Welcome to the Sunday mornings at the Marxist Library. A reminder before we start, we are recording our presentations and the discussions that follow and post these for our wider audience. The videos will be available both at our YouTube channel, ICSS Marxist, and our website, icssmarx.org, in the next couple of days. As the ICSS group, which stands for the Institute for the Critical Study of Society, we are a group of volunteers who organize the meetings and a larger group of participants who meet every Sunday to discuss the world matters, politics, economics, environmental issues, peoples and workers' movements, imperialism, neocolonialism, history, classes, and class struggles impacting the world and human societies around the world. Before the pandemic, we used to meet at the Neville Proctor Marxist Library located at 6501 Telegraph Avenue, Oakland, California. However, after the pandemic, we decided to continue our sessions on Zoom, which also made us open up to the world online real time. So as well as our local participants and speakers from the San Francisco Bay Area, we now have guests and speakers from all over the US and from other countries as well. They endure the time difference to join us. So welcome again and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and even good night to you, wherever you may be joining us right now. My name is Mehmet Bayram, and I will be hosting this session on Sunday, April the 24th, 2022. I'm a member of the program committee that organizes the Sunday mornings at the Marxist Library, and I'd like to start off by reminding everybody that we always welcome your input, feedback, and suggestions for topics and speakers. You can contact us through our website at icssmarx.org. For over 15 years, Sunday mornings at the Marxist Library programs have been a platform for diverse presentations on a variety of topics, such as political economy, capitalism, fascism, socialism, communism, supporting struggles of the working class, the fight against imperialism, militarism, fascism, war, and supporting the environmental movement and the fight for class, ethnic, racial, and gender justice. This meeting is a comradely forum for political discourse and debate. The opinions expressed here are those of the participants, and they do not necessarily represent those of ICSS or the Marxist Library. However, we are united in our respect for the work of Karl Marx, and we believe that his work remains relevant today. Our motto is taken from Karl Marx's 11th thesis on Feuerbach. Quote, "The philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it." As you know, one solution capitalists find to cyclical capitalist crisis is fascism. Fascism is a phenomenon seen in the age of imperialism. Fascism in metropolitan countries may come and go, as we have seen in Spain, Portugal, Germany, or Italy. The cycle of capitalism sometimes makes fascism necessary in order to fend off the socialism threat or keep workers in line or to delay the people's reaction to the crisis until the boom brings relative calm. Then fascism is not needed, and the system returned to bourgeois democracies. The crisis we see in the regular boom-bust cycle in the developed imperialist metropoles exists in a much deeper and continuous state in the neocolonial countries. The very existence of imperialism, which puts the neocolonial countries under the boot and bondage of imperialism, becomes the very reason these countries are in perpetual crisis. Perpetual crisis requires perpetual crisis handling. And what better solution than to employ the crisis solution of the imperialist age of the monopoly capital? With the decline of imperialism, as we see in Ukraine crisis, the metropolitan countries too are sinking deep into crisis after crisis without seeing much of the expected boom periods anymore. This also corresponds to problems of eroding human rights, workers' living conditions, decline in healthcare, education, housing, and environmental conditions, to name a few. These make it right for fascism to be utilized as capitalism is unable to solve its own crisis. With the exception of some Latin American countries, Extreme right-wing movements are winning elections and are getting into power in most of the world today. January 6th insurrection, instigation of the Ukrainian war, attacks on all kinds of freedoms and rights show us that the danger of fascism is not limited to Trump or the GOP. However, in the face of all this, the left is still very divided and seems quite unaware of the danger that lies ahead. Either fascism is not a possibility to most left, or they simply don't care while they live their lives business as usual. The need for a united front to confront the rising fascism is more needed than ever. But what is united front? What is needed to have one? What makes it different from other forms of unity or fronts will be investigated today. We hope that this session will inspire the left to realize that not much time is left for us to organize in order to confront the rising fascism in the United States. So with that, I'll welcome and leave the floor to Ahmed Shakur to explain the United Front as he interprets it, its strategies and examples from the history and around the world. He's an independent labor researcher, journalist, and an activist. He is part of the Red Media Internet Network. I should say that maybe we are not going to see Ahmed's face because he is originally from Turkey. And as we will talk today about fascism, it is very dangerous to show your face and talk about fascism in Turkey. So with that, I will welcome Ahmed. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Ahmed, and let's start with your presentation. Thank you.
Bold of you to assume that I will be muted by anyone.
Yeah.
Hello, comrades. Thanks for inviting me here. I'm really excited to be here. It's such a very vital topic, Workers United Front, to confront all the multiple crises that Mehmet just enumerated. And without further ado, I will just share my screen and get going. Actually, I think I need to be unable to share my screen first. Whoever the host is need to.
You can do that now, Ali.
Okay. Thank you very much. There we go.
Yeah.
Okay. So I will be focusing mostly on possible current applications of the United Front tactic. I will talk about its origin also, but my focus will be on today. I will reconstruct some of the past history as it stands in relation to today and not the other way around. But this photo that you guys see right now is from the Petrograd Soviet in 1917. And as we will see, the Soviets are actually the supreme and highest examples of Workers' United Front. Okay, so what conditions are there for us to call for a united front? This is directly a quote from the Communist International's Executive Committee that they adopted. It's a document called Theses on the United Front. It was adopted in 1922, so exactly 100 years ago, exactly a century ago. And this is the very first thesis, and I think this is like really directly applicable. I'll read it out loud for people who may have difficulty seeing, since screen share doesn't always work so well. The world economic crisis is worsening, unemployment is growing. In almost every country, international capital has gone over to a systematic offensive against the workers, the main evidence of which is the capitalist cynical and open attempts to reduce wages and lower the workers' general standard of living. Unless the international proletariat overthrows the bourgeois system in a new imperialist war, a new imperialist war, or even several such wars, is inevitable. Well, not much has changed in terms of how capitalism operates in the last 100 years, it seems like. So the conditions for a united front are um, kind of a life-death matter, really. This is just a picture of the delegation of the American delegation to the Fourth Congress of the Communist International. I believe William Z. Foster is somewhere there, and so is James Cannon. All right. So, what is the why do we want a united front? That is to say, what problem does the united front intend to solve? So there is a systematic attack throughout, capitalist history by the bosses, by the bourgeoisie, on workers' gains. And as we know, capital is very organized. They're organized in the state. They have the army at their disposal. They have the police force in their disposal, and whatnot. So in order to counter this, a unified working class response is very necessary. And of course, to end these, attacks on workers' gains once and for all, a socialist revolution is necessary. But as a rule, most people, include most workers, are not necessarily revolutionary at all times. So the United Front is not just a means for a bunch of leftists to come together. It's a means for it's a means to make the revolutionary voice heard by the masses. And it's also a means to take a stance in all important matters of the working class's political life, whether it be elections or a war, or if your country is facing an invasion and all that. There has to be a revolutionary proletarian standpoint. The revolutionaries simply cannot not take a stance, and a united front is a way to accomplish that. So I'm going to talk really briefly about, as any dialectician would not do, what the united front is not. Okay, what do we not mean by the united front? The united front is not when very, very small, a few very small organizations come together and they have a total membership of, I don't know, 15 or 20 or what have you, with no or very little influence in the working masses. That can be a helpful coalition on a single issue campaign or whatnot, but that is not a united front. It is also not a very amorphous, kind of loosey-goosey multi-class alliance. There can be, alliances with other oppressed classes of the society, but we're not talking about those, except actually in one case that I will talk about that. But a workers' united front is what it reads. It's a workers' united front. It is not also a means to provide unity just for unity's sake. That is to say, if you're forming a united front, you don't give up your organizational autonomy. You maintain your independent organization. You maintain the right to criticize others in the united front. You maintain your political differences. You maintain your press and whatnot. It's also not a purely theoretical debate group. We see that a lot here in the United States. And it is somewhat related to the first point that I made. If you don't have like a real force within the working class, then no matter how many people you gather around yourself, it will be a kind of a propaganda group. It will be a theoretical debate group, and that is not a united front. I'm not saying those are not valuable things, but we're not talking about these. Now, the most important thing is the united front is not an alliance with the enemy class. That is to say, it is not an alliance with the bourgeoisie. And there have been some disastrous consequences for violating that principle. Except the big exception in this case is that if there is a national liberation movement going on in your country is under open attack by or open invasion by an imperialist force, uh, and there is one section of the bourgeoisie that is trying to counter that, you might form an alliance, and it can be fruitful, as we will see. But even then, there are qualifications, as we will go into. It's also not a formula. It's a formula that is thrown around a lot, but it's not a solution to all of our problems. Um, and there are cases where a formation of a united front is not very advisable. For instance, there have been these conditions in history. If a revolutionary party is the only real force in the left and in the working class, why would they go around and form a united front if they can do everything by themselves? Which has been the case in the past in some countries. Okay. So what is the united front? As you will see, I have written the letter T and some numbers. These are all the numbers of theses from the document that I talked about, theses on the United Front. So you can check it out for yourselves at the end of the discussion. It is an alliance of different working class groups, both reformist and revolutionary. It is a means to create a discipline and unity of working class based on action to counter the attacks from the class enemy, from the bourgeoisie. It is a principled alliance. That is to say, you chart out like on what conditions you strike an alliance from the get-go. And you maintain your autonomy, organizational autonomy, your publications, and your right to criticism. An alliance, it is, if you're a revolutionary party entering a united front, then you have to have full confidence on your ideological and organizational unity. That is to say, you're striking an alliance, but you're not bending over to your allies' position. And that will be supremely important, as we will see. And for the revolutionaries, it can be a means, not necessarily all the time, but it can be a means to win over the majority of the working class by doing two things. Number one, showing that you are the best fighter for their rights in action, not just by words, but in action. Lenin somewhere says, we of course fight for reforms. We are, in fact, we, the revolutionaries, are the best fighters for reforms. But we don't limit ourselves to doing that. And that's the difference between us and reformism. So you have to show the working class that you are the best fighters for their rights, for their gains. And the second one is, by doing that, you also expose the limits and treachery of the reformist misleaders in action. That is to say, you can sit on your corner and criticize this or that organization for being reformist all you want. The masses won't hear you until they see it, and until they see that you offer a better and real solution. Okay. I can stop and is there anything that I need to clarify, or so far so good?
Ahmed, we usually do it like your presentation, and then we go into Q&A sessions.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, sure. In that case, I'll keep going. So why should we be calling a united front right now? Why here and now? Well, the most immediate threat is fascism is on the rise again. Well, the polls don't show like that right now, but fascism, for instance, in France, went into elections with two parties, not one, but two parties. And the total vote of those two parties, was by far the greatest. So fascism is the main real force in French elections right now. And if it does come to power, things will be looking pretty grim. And of course, in the US, we have Trumpism and whatnot. So fascism means a very existential threat to the labor movement. to the very independence of the labor movement, even if reformist. Even if reformist, fascism seeks to wipe out every single bit and piece of working class gains and and every ounce of working class political independence. In the face of this, the working class right now in the U.S. Is making some skirmishes, is making some advances, but it is still very, very divided based on race, nationality, trade, and region. There's a difference between unionized and non-unionized workers. There's a difference between black and white and Latino workers. There's a huge difference between people with or without a work permit based on their nationality. Now, the Democrats, that is to say, the more quote unquote liberal and globalist wing of the bourgeoisie, they have won the election in 2020 at the back of a popular revolt, although they didn't offer any single real solution to the problems of the masses. And everything, I mean, in the last 2 years, everything has been just going worse. They just started another imperialist war, and that can really lead into a worldwide conflagration. The economic crisis is worsening, the inflation is making a comeback, and whatnot. And all this incoherence, all this chaos is playing right into the hands of fascists. That is to say, it allows fascists to say, look, we actually offer the real solution. The Democrats that you voted for, they're just like plunging you into more and more chaos. So, and this is of course a picture from January 6th, kind of a big upheaval of fascism in this country. So these are the conditions that call for a united front right now. So how do we begin? Where do we begin? This is honestly also a very favorable time for a united front, because the bourgeoisie itself is very divided and torn. It can't provide a unified response to the economic and political problems that they face right now. They sometimes, some wings of them try to make concessions to some sections of the working class. They are offering different solutions to the problems that are not real solutions and whatnot. So right now there's a civil war within the U.S. bourgeoisie along party lines. And also, if we go back to 2 years ago, most advanced sections of the working class, most class-conscious sections, have not only joined, but also took leadership initiatives in the George Floyd revolt. I'm thinking of the ILW here on the West Coast, for instance, with the port shutdown. After that, we saw a massive unionization drive. It started off in Amazon. It finally won like a few weeks ago. Starbucks, the UC system, University of California system, and now Apple stores. So like non-unionized sections of the working class is trying to push back. Also in the unionized sectors, we saw a strike wave sweeping across last October and November, with partial successes. That is to say, for instance, John Deere and Kellogg's won major victories, but the Kaiser engineers here in Oakland unfortunately lost their battle. One of the big AFL-CIO branches in Vermont is calling for working class unity and self-defense committees against fascism. So that's an important advance, an important political advance. Also, speaking of, exposing the reformist leaders and their misleadership, I guess Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is a poster child of U.S. reformism nowadays. She has disgraced herself publicly multiple times on the Palestinian issue, but the latest one is, of course, Chris Small saying she doesn't deserve this moment, because she left. She said she would help out the Amazon workers trying to unionize, and she thought it was bad for her publicity, so she dropped the cause. and a real working class leader, Chris Smalls, um, exposed her in front of camera. So uh, very favorable moment. Like speaking of like how to utilize a united front, that's what we want to do. But the important thing is these all these struggles are still very disunited. There's not a real communication between beyond solidarity messages and whatnot. There's no like organizational communication between let's say the unionized workers who are trying to go on strikes and non-unionized workers who are trying to unionize. There's not a real political um, proposals and uh, um, calls for unity between, let's say, as far as I know, at least, between the ILW and Vermont AFL-CIO, stuff like that. So probably our first task as a militant minority calling for a united front will be to draw these threads together, and not only verbally but also organizationally, very materially. But let's say we do form a united front. What would be some immediate tasks? Well, the most burning task right now is self-defense committees in the unions, in neighborhoods, wherever the working class is concentrated, and that is to counter fascist raids that will be coming. The January 6th was the first bullet shot. There will be more to come, and we have to counter that very physically. We will have to organize, unify in a unified, systematic manner. I know there are groups that are doing this here and there, but they have to be unified in one single struggle, organizing legal aid for political prisoners. We have to campaign for for unions to provide self-defense training for their membership, stuff like that. Uh, Class unity. That's the crucial thing. That's where everything revolves around. We will have to, the United Front will be an organizational framework where we, as the working class and revolutionaries, can resolve our internal or attempt to resolve or at least iron out our internal conflicts, our internal differences, without taking it to the bourgeois state, without taking it to the police or whatnot. Uh, we'll have and this will also be a means to entrench the gains and ongoing struggles of the working class right now. For instance, I gave the example of the Kaiser hospital engineers here in Oakland. They lost because nobody came to their aid, and their numbers are limited. So they went on for, I think, almost 100 days, which broke the Bay Area record, by the way. It was the longest strike that the Bay Area has seen. And they lost because nobody came to their aid. No other portion of the working class came to their aid. Organizationally, I'm not talking about like individual solidarity statements or whatever. So a united front would provide that kind of framework to come to the aid of the working class wherever they're struggling. Class independence. Political independence of the working class is crucial in fighting off fascism and in entrenching the game. The Democrats are not going to come to our aid, folks. That's the most important thing to understand. In fact, I sympathize with those workers who have voted for Joe Biden in the last elections just to fend off for themselves and fend off the threat of fascism. That is still rampant in the U.S. But I also want to say that that is not a real solution. In fact, as the Democrats are plunging more and more into ambiguity and contradictory policies, more and more workers will actually be won over by fascism. So a working class program and running working class political candidates in elections on independent slates, based on alliances with oppressed community organizations and whatnot. Um, this will be a very important task of any united front, and uh, all of this hopefully will culminate into the formation of a working class party, uh, a mass working class party, a real political force based on the unions, based on the real struggles of the working class. Um, that will be also a very important task of the United Front. I think 2 years ago here in Oakland, we saw kind of like the beginnings of a United Front. Unfortunately, it didn't materialize into a full-fledged, fully fleshed United Front, Workers United Front, but Committee to Stop Police Terror and End Systemic Racism that was responsible for the. You probably saw it on the news, or maybe if you're living in the area, you participate in it. Um, the massive Oakland Juneteenth rally, and the West Coast port shutdown. There was some talk about formation of a working class party for running candidates, and whatnot, in the aftermath of Juneteenth. Unfortunately, it didn't materialize, and there are some lessons to be drawn there, and I would be willing to discuss them later on in the Q&A section or something. Now, there are, of course, all sorts of obstacles in our path if we want to form a united front. I'll start with the objective obstacles. So the divisions that we talked about within the working class are not merely ideological. They are very, very material, very real. Racial divisions, we might also add gender divisions. And these may be resolved, although there's no guarantee, these may be resolved by a resolute class-based leadership by workers of color. That is to say, if the most advanced section of the working class, which is, as we saw in the past 2 years, if not before, which is usually working class organizations, mainly of color. If these provide a real leadership with a real working class program, then we might also win over white workers who may or may not be voting for Trump right now. That's a possibility. Also, for decades in the US, we have a very entrenched, very treacherous, very inactive union bureaucracy that is kind of like acting as the tie between the working class, organized working class, and the Democratic Party. And they won't go down without a fight. We know that. And speaking of the Democratic Party, it has a very real grip on the left through the dead mass that is a DSA leadership. That is to say, I mean, they have been really instrumental in channelizing their own, very young basis and that energy into just voting for the Democrats instead of forming an independent class force. Of course, I'm talking about the leadership and not the membership. In fact, I know for a fact that there have been real struggles within the DSA, and there have been real debates within the DSA to split from the Democrats and provide a framework for class independence. And of course, I also mentioned the union bureaucracy as kind of a tie between the organized labor and the Democrats. And of course, COVID-19. I mean, we're having this meeting over Zoom right now, which sure allows us to, reach to people living not in the Bay Area but somewhere else. But also, wouldn't you rather have this meeting in person? Like that's a real difficulty that we have. The circulation of information is much more incoherent, much more chaotic. I can't I can't follow up on all my emails. Can you? I can't, and they have been like uh, getting worse and worse during COVID. So that's a real obstacle. Now there are also like subjective or ideological obstacles that we will have to uh, fend off for. Now there are twin dangers of the on the left that are very very prevalent, unfortunately. Uh, One of them is self-righteous sectarianism. That is to say, there are all these like really really small organizations, and you can be a small organization, of course, but I call it self-righteous sectarianism because they think they are the vanguard already, and you are like what, 5 people, 20 people. Um, you don't just become the vanguard party by declaring yourself the vanguard. You have to win over the real vanguard of the working class. Um, and That's a pretty like widespread disease of the left in the US. Um, and also, of course, the other extreme, the polar opposite, is what the DSA leadership, and I want to emphasize again, the leadership, not the membership, is doing, is that is to say, wavering between the Democrats and um, their own constituency, that their own young militants. Uh, I feel like honestly, I usually don't like attribute psychological problems to these type of political problems, but they almost act as if they have some sort of a separation anxiety from the Democratic Party. Uh, Whenever there is a push by their membership to go further to the left, they waver, like they get carried away, and then immediately they almost apologize and run back to the Democratic Party, and that's a very dangerous attitude. There's also a general atmosphere of just being burnt out, being tired, and being cynical, uh, and that is completely understandable. I mean, the times are tough, the times are intense, and it's very understandable that people feel burnt out, but it's also a dangerous factor. For instance, we saw after January 6th, after the fascist coup attempt or insurrection or whatever you call it, um, we saw that there was barely any response on the left. There was barely any response. They just wanted to go back to business as usual because they're burnt out. Of course, for 3 or 4 decades now, uh, identity politics, postmodern politics have been really prevalent on the left. That will be a big ideological battle for sure. And the working class itself is ideologically bifurcated. Some of the disgruntled workers choose to go over fascism, while others choose to vote blue no matter who, just to kind of prevent the rise of fascism. And we will have to show to either side that uh, neither of the solutions will, neither of these proposed solutions will bring anything to their any real solution to their problems, and it will be a difficult battle. But all of this can be resolved only and only through practice, only through struggle within the ranks of the working class. I can't offer you any clear-cut solution. That's how we get over sectarianism. That's how we get over cynicism. Uh, we will learn as we go. Okay, now I'm going to plunge into history, and I'll consider some of the applications or misapplications of the United Front. Historically, I have a few examples, uh, and we can discuss each or more later on. So this is a picture of the Shanghai massacre. This is a nationalist soldier with a sword in his hand, Kuomintang soldier, chopping off a communist's head. And how things got there, I want to really briefly talk about. Whoopsie. Okay, there we go. So here we see also, like, as we will see, the United Front in each and every of these cases has been an attempt to resolve a different problem. So in 1927, the Chinese communists have the issue of national liberation in their hands. China is a semi-colonial country, and they want to get rid of that situation. And at that point, the Chinese Communist Party is practicing entryism. That is to say, they form a faction of the nationalist bourgeois party, Kuomintang. But very quickly, by the time 1927 comes, the CCP is already constituting almost the majority of the Nationalist Party. And of course, the nationalist leadership doesn't like it. So they ban all communist activity among the youth and among the peasants. Now, violating their own thesis that they adopted 5 years ago, the Communist International orders the Chinese Communist Party to remain in and submit to the discipline of the Kuomintang. So violating the principle of organizational autonomy. At the same time, a general strike is threatening to escalate into a revolution in Shanghai. It paralyzes the entire country. But the Communist Party allows the Kuomintang, the nationalists, to disarm the workers. And the Kuomintang then proceeds to slaughter communists and striking workers. And the membership of the Communist Party goes down, it wrinkles, and the party itself is saved only by fleeing to the countryside, which, as we know, will pick up the struggle there and carry it forward very successfully. Now, what changed? As we know, the Chinese Communist Party will strike another alliance in 1937 with the Kuomintang. So what was the difference between these two that led into the Shanghai massacre in the first and a tremendous success in the second case? And obviously this is Mao Zedong with the Red Army. So again, 1937, the problem in question is national liberation, but there is a real movement right now for this to grow over to socialist revolution. Now, there is, of course, the Japanese invasion going on. Now, Kuomintang, the Nationalist Party, suffers a terrible, humiliating defeat in their own capital, Nanjing, which is recorded right now, the rape of Nanjing. And the Kuomintang forces just like collapse without shooting a single rifle against the Japanese imperialist army. So that already shows to the masses that the Nationalist Party is not a real solution to their problem. Chiang Kai-shek, the leader of the Nationalists, is forced to offer the Communist Party an alliance. The Communist Party accepts this alliance, but differently from 1927, they accept it only on the condition of territorial and organizational autonomy. Now, territorial autonomy allows the Chinese communists to launch an agrarian reform that the nationalists are refusing the peasants, and arming the peasants, arming the working masses. That's the crucial difference. The CCP, and Mao makes this point over and over again in his documents from the period, the CCP provides the best fighters against the Japanese invasion in the National Liberation War, which means that more and more people sympathize with the Communist Party, and the authority of the Kuomintang progressively disintegrates. And after the Japanese invasion ends with the end of World War II in 1945, it takes only 4 years for the Chinese Communist Party to completely wipe out the Kuomintang and carry the national liberation movement into a socialist revolution. And just to compare the results between the two, this is obviously a famous Mao quote. We have closed our ranks and defeated both domestic and foreign oppressors through the People's War of Liberation and the Great People's Revolution. And now we're proclaiming the founding of the People's Republic of China. His famous speech in 49. Meanwhile, a year ago, let's see what Chiang Kai-shek is saying, the leader of the Kuomintang is saying. Never in China or abroad has there been a revolutionary party as decrepit and degenerate as we are today, nor one as lacking spirit, lacking discipline, and even more lacking standards of right and wrong as we are today. This kind of party should long ago have been destroyed and swept away. This is the leader of the party that's saying this. So you see, through a successful United Front tactic, the application of the United Front tactic, you are able to disintegrate not only your immediate enemy, that in this case the Japanese army, but also your ally that is after the alliance your opponent. Okay, another utter failure is Spain during the Spanish Civil War, another misapplication of the United Front tactic. This is, of course, a photo from the really heroic defense of Madrid that unfortunately, at the end of the day, remains unsuccessful. But it should be saluted, the courageous defense against the fascist forces. So what's going on in Spain is, the problem is there's an unfinished revolution. That is to say, it is underway. They overthrow the monarchy and whatnot, but they're struggling to carry it over. And at the same time, they're facing a fascist reaction. Now, the biggest problem that the working class has, remember, we talked about how the working class can be divided. The big problem in Spain is there is a division between the skilled workers and unskilled workers and semi-proletarian peasants. The skilled workers are organized in the Socialist Party, that is to say, a reformist party, and the Union Confederation that is called the UGT. The more recent kind of like fresh migrants from the countryside and the cities and the semi-proletarian masses are organized in the CNT, an anarcho-syndicalist organization. So like the divisions between generations and skill levels of workers are carrying over to political divisions. In 1931, there's a mass movement that overthrows the monarch, a bourgeois republic is proclaimed, and socialists enter the bourgeois government. Now that's a tremendous mistake. Because the bourgeois government, sooner or later, every bourgeois government will sooner or later take anti-working class measures. And if you're participating in that government, you're also participating in the anti-working class measures, which happens in Spain very promptly, because workers and peasants are in this revolutionary atmosphere naturally trying to fend off for their own interests. And there are strike waves and land occupations going on throughout 33 and 34. The government, in which the socialists, but also the clerical Catholic reactionary party, they're both participating in the government. They use our friend General Franco's soldiers to suppress this strike wave. So they are feeding off their archenemy, the army, already with their own hands. But the mounting pressure from the reactionaries on the one hand, and on the other hand, the revolting workers, um, the causes this government to collapse. And in 36, uh, the so-called popular government, the Frente Popular, is elected in 1936, in which some liberal bourgeois parties, together with the socialist and communist parties, that is to say, working class parties, are participating. At that stage, the bourgeoisie, the industrialists, and whatnot just desert the government and flee over to the Phalangists, that is to say, the fascist army. These are some of the actors. General Franco, the leader of the Falangist movement, the anarchists, the CNT, and the Social Democrats. Franco's army in 36 revolts. As a response, the workers and peasants all over the country take over the land and factories and organize defense committees against the fascist threat. However, at this point, all of the working class parties, the POM, the Communist Party, the Socialist Party, all of them, and the anarchists have accepted to collaborate with the bourgeois government. And what the bourgeois government is trying to do is to strike a deal with the and concessions to the army. So this prevents the unity of the working class. There is no, like, the organizational autonomy is compromised. The workers' press is suppressed at the very beginning of the Civil War by the Popular Front government. And instead of arming the workers and peasants, for the longest time, the Popular Front government curbs all social reforms that it itself had proclaimed a few months ago, and rules arming the workers illegal. In fact, the very first day of the insurrection, Franco's insurrection, the Popular Front government in Madrid says whoever distributes arms to the workers will be shot on spot. And this is to assure that the Western democracies, France and whatnot, will come to the aid of the Republican Spain, but they're not amused. They completely desert. They, in fact, implant blockades to the armament shipments to the Republican Spain, which causes, obviously, a huge disadvantage to the Republican government. At the same time, the gains of the revolution are taken aback one by one by the Popular Front government itself, and the masses start to grow, especially the peasants. They start to grow indifferent to the war. Well, the Popular Front is not giving me what I want. The Phalangists are not giving me what I want. So why do I care? And in 1939, the westernmost part of the country, Barcelona and Valencia, they both fall without a single shot. Fascist victory. The entry of Franco into Valencia. Really quickly, my second to last example, and this is from this country, the United States. That starts off pretty successfully, but unfortunately ends in failure. And we will see why. To the left, you see the Young Lords Party. Sorry, the Young, not the Young Lords Party. Sorry, the Young Patriots Party. White radical kind of imitators and allies of the Black Panther Party. And to your right, you see the Black Panthers party's call for a united front against fascism. There has been a important meeting in 1970, I believe, here in Oakland, called the United Front Against Fascism Conference. Really briefly, I'll consider that. and how things went. So in this case, the United Front is trying to solve the problem of state violence in terms of in the form of police violence, and also state-sanctioned violence. That is to say, uh, not directly like people armed by the state, security officers or whatever, but people who are collaborating with them. At this point, the Black Panthers are feeling really cornered. They have grown tremendously, but their entire leadership cadre, almost entire leadership cadre, are either in jail or have been shot dead or are in exile. And those who are still outside are still facing charges. The conservative Nixon government is in power at this point, so they're pretty cornered. So they launch this campaign called UFAF, United Front Against Fascism, here in Oakland, as I said. And at the beginning, it looks like it's a tremendous success because suddenly, next to the Panther offices all over the country, you start seeing UFAF offices. And this is specifically designed by the party to draw in non-black radicals, non-black revolutionaries to their side so that they can fend off against police violence and whatnot together. But there are two problems with the Black Panther Party itself at this point. Number one, actually three big problems. Number one, the Black Panthers themselves are trying to water down their demands. That is to say, they are trying to adjust their own policy to the level of mass movement rather than trying to take the mass movement itself one step higher. And as we saw, if you're a serious revolutionary united front, that's exactly what you're trying to do. You're trying to take it one step higher, one step higher. Not too far off, not too far ahead of the masses. As Lenin says, the vanguard has to walk one step ahead of the masses, but only one step ahead. But instead, the Black Panthers at this point are watering down their demands. They're demanding not even the abolition of the police, but community control over the police and stuff like that. They have no proletarian policy. Even if you're striking a deal with the non-proletarian elements, you have to, if you're a serious Marxist revolutionary, you have to have some sort of a proletarian policy, some sort of a working class policy. And the Black Panthers simply don't have it. And the Black Panther Party itself is at the verge of disintegrating at this point. 1 year later, Eldridge Cleaver will deflect. So, together with the party offices all around the country, the UFAF offices will also be shut down by the Panther leadership itself. So soon enough, it disintegrates. And my last example, and then we can go into Q&A. Sheer success. Russia, 1917. Obviously, we all know what happened. There was a democratic revolution. That is to say, it toppled down the Tsar by the workers. And it soon carried over into a socialist revolution and formed the first workers' state on the face of the earth within a few months. And the Bolsheviks, who were at the helm of the socialist revolution, when they are you can look into the Comintern documents and later documents that I said. Whenever they're talking about the United Front, they're talking about Russia 1917. They're giving the Soviets as a supreme example of a United Front. Why? Because there are all the parties of the working class represented in this institution. That is the Soviets. The Mensheviks are there, the reformists. The Bolsheviks obviously are there. Other parties, liberal parties, whatnot, are there. And moreover, when the liberal bourgeois government, Kerensky's government, is under the threat of a military coup by Kornilov, this General Kornilov, who will go on to become one of the fighters in the civil war in the White Army. Uh, the Bolsheviks strike an alliance with Kerensky himself momentarily and provide the best fighters against Kornilov's army, and that is what wins the majority of the working class over to the Bolsheviks through a successful application of the United Front. All right, I'll stop sharing now. That is my presentation. I'm open to any questions, discussions, wild disagreements, whatever you have.
Oh, yeah, okay. Eugene, do you want to say a few words now before we go to the question and answers? Gene?
Okay, I'm unmuting myself and you can probably see me now.
Not yet, but just
Well,
wait one second.
that treat is still in store for you, but you can hear me, right?
Yes, correct. We can hear you.
Yeah. Thankfully, they won't let me start my video. So
no, you can start it.
No, that's all right. That's all right. Let's see. Yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to say thank you so much. That was a great talk. It covers a lot of ground, and there's a very lot to assimilate there. So we have our work cut out for us, and I have my work cut out for me for next week. I'll be talking about the abolishment of war, which may seem paradoxical with now that things are so screwed up all over the world. The idea of abolishing war may seem far-fetched, but I'll just remember that I draw very heavily on Engels when he talked about when we reorganize society on the basis of free association, then this whole state machinery will disappear. And of course, if the state disappears, war disappears with it. But I'll cover that next time. And then we have a couple of other excellent talks. We're not sure exactly how we're going to arrange them. So we have a number of issues we need to work out. But we will endeavor to continue a high level that we've had today. And thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Yeah, great. Today, usually after Eugene, Richard Follenbaum comes on and talks about the finances of this group. And today, Richard is not with us. So let me just briefly say that, doing all this, and as Ahmed had mentioned in the beginning, we are considering going back to the library soon, maybe in a hybrid session, so that we can both keep the Zoom sessions and the library face-to-face meetings. But all of this requires some kind of investment. And we do not have that. So we are in constant need of something just for the website, for the mailing. As you've seen, the mailing has collapsed in the last couple of weeks. So we need to work through those. And so we do need funds. If you can please go to our website, and there you will see, how to become a member. That gets you into the mailing list. And we really appreciate your help if you can contribute to something. Some people have joined in Patreon and through PayPal or sending us checks. And that keeps us alive and makes this program going. Thank you. So now we're going to go to the Q&A session. I'm going to be calling out names, and Please then unmute yourselves and let's be civil and let's not talk over each other. We usually limit the questions and answers to 2 minutes, and then we give the necessary time to our presenter to respond. And I have at this point 3 hands, and you can raise your hand by going to the bottom of your Zoom screen, and in reactions you can click on the raise hand, and if you can please lower your hand after you've spoken. So I have at this point 3 hands up. Tryon in New York, Yusuf and Sharon are on the stack now. Tryon, if you can please, unmute yourself and go ahead, please.
Okay, my question is, can, in the bourgeois system, when there's a bourgeois system and you have a leader who really has a fascist ideology, but he's utilizing the capitalist bourgeois system to get a lot of his program through. For instance, I think that Biden has a lot of fascism in him because he's bringing the world to a nuclear war, very close confrontation with Russia, just reckless. And his blood on his hands from Yugoslavia to Libya to Afghanistan and Iraq. And I just had that feeling that some of these fascists use the system to get their program through, even though it's a capitalist system, but their ideology really is extreme. So that's my question.
Point of order, do I
Yes.
answer now, or like
Ahmed, it's up to you. If you want to collect few questions and then answer them, that's fine. Or if you want to go directly to one-on-one question answer, that's also fine. Up to you.
Okay, in that case, yeah, let's do maybe like a three questions at a time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then I have Yusuf and Sharon, and then I added Raj and Eugene to the stack. Go ahead, Yusuf.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a very interesting questions. However, Mehmet said you were from Turkey, and it seems obviously from your logo you are. So instead of talking about far-off lands like Oakland, the topic you are talking about is a current discussion within the left, and moreover in Turkey, the conjuncture is such that actually what the left does could make a difference. So could you please give your thoughts? I might not even, perhaps I might not agree with them, or perhaps I will agree with them on applying your this question of United Front, Popular Front, to what is going on in Turkey. And this may be unfamiliar with most of the audience, and you have to give your a brief update. Thank you.
For sure, thank you.
Yes, the next is Sharon.
Thank you. This is a great presentation. Thank you, Ahmed. I have a few comments and then we'll end with a question. So, Ahmed, at one point I heard you call the United Front a tactic, and I believe that it should be called a strategy, that it's a strategic view of moving the revolution forward. Let me say, I'm sorry. I thank you for your examples. They're extremely helpful. I would comment about the example of China. First of all, I believe that we should always say Communist Party of China, CPC, rather than Chinese Communist Party. And I think that was the general standard of the Comintern. So, for example, there's no such thing as the American Communist Party, even though people refer to it all the time. It's the Communist Party USA. With your example of the Black Panthers was extremely interesting to me, and especially you said they had no proletarian policy, and I believe that's very true, but it might need some explanation. So they started out for a long time, they called themselves based in the lumpen proletariat. And they did attract people who were from the lumpen proletariat, but as one of their leaders once told me, that was baloney. He said about himself, I woke up one day and I said to myself, wait a minute, I'm stone working class. My parents are working people all their lives, and so are my grandparents and their grandparents. And why am I calling myself lumpen? That's baloney. So they made a mistake about who their base was. And finally, let me ask my question. So classically, the theory of a united front, of the necessity to build a united front, to build a revolution, is very well documented and debated and talked about among revolutionaries internationally for a long time. But it usually, as far as I can tell from reading, it usually also includes the understanding that if you have a very strong united front of the working class as a core, the next thing you want to do is build a popular front around that. And the best example is a popular front, which is an alliance of a united front with bourgeois forces in the Second World War to defeat fascism. And so I was wondering if you could comment on the notion of what does a popular front look like today? And should we think about who we could unite around that, with that? Or is it too soon because we're still so far away from having a strong united front core?
Okay. There's a lot to unpack there. All right, I'll do my best. So the first question was about the role of Biden within the system and whether fascists in general can use the system to their advantage. I think there are two distinct questions there. Number one, whether Biden can be properly called a fascist or not. I will say I don't think so. And not because he's not a racist, not because he's not a reactionary. He's a reactionary imperialist politician, for sure. And we do have to fight against him. But based solely on his economic policies, if you compare his economic policies with Trump's, for instance, there's a major difference. And the major difference is Biden is still pushing for kind of oh yeah, somebody said he's a declared Zionist. Absolutely true. Absolutely true. He's a reactionary bourgeois politician that needs to go, for sure. But if we don't make the analytic distinction between an out and out fascist like Trump or Modi, for instance, in India, and someone like Biden, who is more of an ordinary bourgeois politician, from the standpoint of proletarian democracy, not from the standpoint of bourgeois democracy, then we will make mistakes. And mistakes have been made precisely on this question in Italy and in Germany. The other question, I guess, is can a fascist in general, regardless of like who this is, manipulate and use the ordinary like bourgeois system to his or her advantage? Absolutely. Definitely. And we saw that, we are seeing that in Turkey right now. One of the like the party in government is kind of a bourgeois Islamist party, but they are only able to stand in the government with the aid of the fascists, the Nationalist Movement Party, MAPE, an out-and-out fascist party. And so, yeah, they are benefiting from a crisis situation, even though they are directly not themselves in power. So that's my answer to Trajan. Question about Turkey, what the left can do in Turkey. So the left in Turkey, unfortunately, well, the left in Turkey has a very heroic past, and it should be saluted. Unfortunately, in the last few decades, it has moved farther and farther apart from working class politics and class independence. There are major exceptions. Obviously, but by and large. But right now, what can be done in Turkey that would bring about a tremendous success, in my opinion, would be right now there are, again, discussions around new elections, and new alliances are being formed and whatnot. If a few socialist parties can come together and run a socialist candidate independent of all the bourgeois parties right now, that would be an important campaign, in my opinion, on the electoral level. On the non-electoral level, where the class struggle is being waged in factories, in working class neighborhoods and whatnot, what I've been saying, a Workers' United Front is directly applicable there too. There is a strike wave sweeping across Turkey right now, and unfortunately, not a lot of socialist parties are doing their job in aiding that. So that could be a great difference. The Black Panther Party having no proletariat. Oh, before that, should the United Front be called a tactic or a strategy? I believe I use the word tactic because the United Front is indeed a very specific a very specific form of organizing that is not applicable everywhere. There was already some distinction between the United Front and a Popular Front, for instance, all that. And there are cases, historical cases, for instance, in Bulgaria in 1920s, where the Communist Party, the Revolutionary Party, is really the only sizable force in the working class. So the United Front in that case is not applicable because there is no one to do United Front work with to begin with. That's why I call it a tactic. But it's more of a, where does the distinction lie between a tactic and a strategy? That's a different question, and I'm open to debate about it. But that's my justification for using the word tactic for the United Front. The Black Panthers having no proletarian policy. What I meant by that is, of course, they did have, although I don't have the statistics, there was a sizable working class base within the Black Panther Party. And they did, like, in the very late 60s or early 70s, under Masai Hewitt, one of the Panther leaders, they did develop a kind of an approachment with the unions and whatnot. But their main orientation was arming the brothers on the block, as they would call it, they would call them, arming the brothers on the block against police violence and doing community work in Black neighborhoods. And that's fundamentally different from what the Bolsheviks did, or what the Communist Party did in China, or what the American communists and socialists and whatnot and revolutionary Marxists did in the 30s. So that's what I meant when I said they didn't have a fundamentally proletarian policy. So the question on the Popular Front. There have been obviously theoretical debates about it, and I'm not going to go into those right now. But the ultimate test of theory is practice, right? And there have been two Popular Front governments, not only movements, but governments that have taken power in France and in Spain. I considered Spain in my presentation. And they were utter failures. In fact, I was talking about the Western democracies not coming to the aid of the Republican government, the Popular Front government in Spain. They had a whole theory about the Western democracies did. They had a whole theory about non-intervention, not like why we shouldn't intervene into the internal affairs of Spain. And the theorist of this so-called theory of non-intervention was no one else than Leon Blum, the head of the popular government in France. And after only 3 years of popular government rule in France, in which the Popular Front government itself kind of put the brakes on the French Revolution unfolding out of a major general strike in France, the Nazis invaded France without shooting a single gun, without shooting a single bullet. What kind of a success is that? Now, does it mean that we shouldn't strike alliances with sections of the petty bourgeoisie or sections of the bourgeoisie, whatnot? Of course not. Of course not. In China, as I said, and we can add this to, we can add Yugoslavia as an example too. If there is a foreign intervention into your country, like an open military intervention, imperialist intervention into your country, and if at least a section of the bourgeoisie is fighting back in one way or another, then you do want to strike an alliance. Otherwise, you risk not being involved and therefore discrediting yourself in the eyes of the masses. Of course, but popular frontism, that is to say, seeking governmental power through an alliance with the bourgeois parties, in which you renounce your own organizational and programmatic autonomy, which in France and Spain people did, and in Chile too. We might as well add Chile into this mix too. That, like, historically has brought failure, not success.
Okay, thank you, Ahmed. Now we have on the stack Raj, Jean, Susan, and Hisham. So go ahead,
Can we do
Raj.
3 at a time? So like,
no, let's go one by one, because we may lose focus on the question and the answer that will come. We forget the questions. Hey, we are most of us are 70 years old.
okay, whatever you say.
Okay, go ahead, Raj.
Okay, thank you, Ahmed, for the presentation. Very interesting. Now, there are two theories on United Front. One is, I think, Trotsky's. The other is, I think, Dimitrov's thesis. And I wanted to know from you, when you're presenting these, it seems like you were certainly on Spain, you were presenting Trotsky's ideas on it. And because when I hear the other side, what I find is that Barcelona revolt of 1936 was a stab in the back of the front that was formed. I guess you would call it Popular Front, and that weakened the fight against monarchists, which is sort of fascists of the time, the general Franco. Now, so I would like some clarification as to what is the difference between these two. And then I want to take up the same thing with reference to Russian Revolution. Okay? I'm not as well read on Chinese Revolution, but Russian Revolution I've sufficiently read. So on the Russian Revolution, Lenin formed an alliance with the peasants in order for the revolution. Now that would be, in your terms, be called Popular Front, because it was interclass alliance, because the peasants were really petty bourgeois. So, and that is what actually advanced revolution. And then when revolution was achieved, later on, Stalin made the next step forward, which is to differentiate among the peasantry on class basis, because peasantry is a little bit behind in class consciousness, and then when that was sort of emerging sufficiently, maybe not sufficiently, but at some point, collectivization was the second stage of Russian Revolution, in my opinion. So it seems like you have made a theory. I mean, you're using the theory here very like a very fundamental thing in struggle for working class power. But I see Lenin, whom I think we all share as one of the greatest revolutionary leader, did not use that theory in the Russian Revolution. And secondly, in the fight against fascism and when Hitler achieved power, I'm not talking before, there's a lot of debate about Hitler coming to power, Trotsky's criticism of Stalin, and so forth. But in order to fight Hitler, he sought alliance with imperialist country, bourgeois, not only bourgeois, imperialist countries to defeat Hitler. And in the end, they shied away, and so he bought time by having a non-aggression pact, and then knowing fully well you're going to have to fight that, and eventually got some support instead of having them collectively supporting Hitler. At that point, Hitler having attacked the West, he could get support from them. So none of all my examples here show the success of the United Front. You have mentioned Spain, but on Spain I hear two sides, and I don't know which one to believe. And if you can comment on this, I think it will clarify for us a little more. Thank you.
For sure. So, I mean, I have no reason to hide my politics. I am a revolutionary Marxist, or a Trotskyist, as it is sometimes called. I have no problem in saying that out loud. But I'm not here to debate theories. That is to say, of course, the theory is coming through, from what I talk about. But I'm not here to debate theories in the sense that Trotsky said this, Dimitrov said that, Stalin said this, Lenin said that. We're not I don't want to talk about words. I want to talk about policies. Which policy was successful and which one was not. On that note, Spain. Let's talk about Spain for a second. You say that some of the historians of the Spanish Revolution say that somebody stabbed the Popular Front government in the back. I would like to learn who that somebody was. In that, I know, like, the so-called quote-unquote Trotskyites are usually accused of that. There were maybe like 20 Trotskyists in Spain towards the end of Spanish Civil War. I wonder what they plotted to, so to speak, stab the Popular Front government in the back. There is, however, the real, like I was telling earlier, Franco revolts. Franco declares revolt, and the government in Madrid says, we are going to strike a deal with the soldiers. Don't panic. We're not going to distribute arms to the workers. Whoever distributes arms to the workers will be shot on spot. That is documented. Trotsky doesn't talk about this. but historians do. And I'm not talking about specifically Trotskyist or Marxist historians in Trotskyist tendencies or traditions. Paul Preston, kind of a liberal but empirical historian. If you read his book, for instance, on Spanish Civil War, he documents this. He doesn't have any sympathy for Trotskyism. In fact, he leans towards, not necessarily the Communist Party of Spain, but Popular Front government. He's a fan of Azaña, who was the head of the president of the Popular Front government in Spain. But he says that it's all documented. So that's my clarification on Spain. And if there are further questions, I'm happy to answer. Was Lenin a practitioner of a popular front? Because obviously, the kind of Bolshevik trademark policy of alliance between peasantry and the working class. Now, Workers' United Front and intra-class alliances are different things. That is to say, of course, to ensure proletarian hegemony, and that's the term Bolsheviks used to use in their discussions with the alliance with the peasantry. If you want to ensure proletarian hegemony over all toiling classes, you will have to make concessions, you will have to strike alliances and whatnot. And there's no, of course, there's no problem with that. Now, United Front, as a means to ensure working class unity in front of the common threat, that is the bourgeois class and whatnot, that is a different policy. And the Soviets, the Petrograd Soviets, there were peasant representatives, but they were in a very, very tiny minority. What the Petrograd Soviets, that's the example I gave as a supreme example, the highest level of a united front, was a working class affair. In fact, the Bolsheviks went on, remember, to form a coalition government with the left SRs, with the left social revolutionaries, which was a peasant party. But that is not to be conflated with the United Front policy that the Bolsheviks applied to other working class parties in the Petrograd Soviet, where the action was happening. We shouldn't conflate those two. That's why also I kept calling the United Front a tactic and not a strategy, because these are different things and they're applicable in different situations. The only united front with a non-proletarian force, as the Bolsheviks discussed it, was the anti-imperialist United Front, which was first unsuccessfully and then successfully applied in China, as I discussed in my presentation. So yeah, I think that was the question, right? Did I miss anything?
I think I will take it in and let others comment or question,
Okay.
maybe return to it.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Raj. Now we have Jean. Jean, go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And I'm not sure we haven't set ourselves an impossible task to cover the China, United States, Soviet Union, Turkey, and everything else under one framework. But it's a worthwhile try, and I think we're having a good discussion on this. But for myself, I've been involved with American electoral politics for a long time. And I remember when Reagan was elected, I was telling people, well, don't worry, this is just American politics bottoming out. It can't get any worse, and things can only get better. And you see that how much I know about US politics, given what's happened since then. And sometimes we say, if God had wanted us to vote, she would have given us candidates. And look what we have, a pretty sorry bunch. So I did run for Congress in 1982 on the Peace and Freedom Party platform, which I think is still one of the best real working class platforms available, but there's no one really to implement it. But I think that's, it's really kind of a bleak situation. And this is only sort of partially humorous, but I always tell people, well, settle for Biden. And the message here is we're not going to get somebody we want, a worthwhile politician. And let's just settle for Biden. He's what we have. He's available, and he's not as bad as the alternative. And some would argue to the contrary. I agree. But, going into the coming elections here in California, it doesn't really make any difference how we vote in presidential elections, because the Democrats going to win. So we can vote any way we want to. And I ordinarily vote for Gloria Riva, the Party for Socialism and Liberation candidate. But, what's going on now is really a bleak situation. And I don't know what to say other than that. I'm not sure I really have a question other than perhaps this may be a new concept, the unpopular front. That would be Biden or Harris, should that be our choice then. So I'll let you comment on that as you wish. Thank you.
So what did we decide on? Do I comment on it right now, or do I wait for?
Yes, if
Okay.
you can, please, yeah.
Okay. So I appreciate the input because I really want to discuss more, current politics and concrete policies and whatnot more than theory. So I appreciate the input. That said, Comrade Eugene, I will have to say I severely disagree with you, and that's because, again, let's talk about like what's going on. I don't know if anyone followed a few months ago the local, that is to say, state elections in Virginia and in New Jersey, just a few months ago. I don't know if anyone followed it. As you know, New Jersey, especially, Virginia is a swing state. New Jersey has been controlled by the Democrats for decades. It remained under Democratic control, but it was a 49-51 tie, 49% to 51%. And that's unprecedented. 49% of the voters in New Jersey, mainly the working class suburbs of New Jersey, went over to the Republicans. And why is that? That's because at the same time, Biden was very busy debating the infrastructure bill that was crippled by his own party before it passed. Right. And working class people are seeing the indecision among the Democratic ranks. And that's what's frustrating them. Many, not most, but many white working class people who have been voting for the Democrats for decades through their unions and whatnot went over to the Republican side when Trump came along. And why? Because the Democratic Party effectively abandoned them with deindustrialization, with union busting, with all these policies. People go over fascism because they are sick and tired of the status quo. And Biden represents exactly that, the status quo. So saying that we should settle for Biden, as you say it humorously, settle for Biden because he represents at least the status quo, and he's a little bit better than the alternative, is really like pushing a bunch of disgruntled workers over to the Republican side, over to the fascist side. That's precisely what people don't want. That's why they're looking for alternatives. And since there is no real working class alternative right now, they are going over to fascism. And that is up to us to provide a real working class alternative. It might take a year, it might take 5, it might take 10. But we have to start right now because we're running out of time.
Yeah,
By the way,
thank you.
this same applies to France and a bunch of other countries as well. This is not just a US phenomenon.
Thank you, Ahmed. Now I have on the stack Susan, Hashem, and Mark. So go ahead, Susan, please. Unmute yourself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Ahmed, for your presentation.
My pleasure.
I would like to read some of the things you've written, and I wonder if you can direct me to a website, articles, whatever. And I have something else to say, but could you put stuff in the chat, perhaps?
Sure. About what, though?
Well, this topic.
Sorry, what?
This topic, current events, etc.
Sure, I was planning on it. I was going to do it at the end of the meeting.
Ahmed, if you can't do it right now in the chat, you know that we will be publishing the video on our website, so we can put it under the video so people can go and link to those resources.
Okay, sure.
Okay, so I want to discuss current matters. I'm glad you do. I appreciated the examples from history. You gave some examples currently. You mentioned DSA, and I have some questions about what you said. One is you talked about the dead mass of DSA. I'm not sure what that means. And then you talked about the leaders, and I would like to know who you think they are or what you know about them. And then you talked about nobody coming to the support of the Kaiser engineers. I've been involved with the new DSA for 5 years, and I watched the trends within it. East Bay DSA supported the Kaiser engineers with time on the picket and a fundraising campaign for the strike fund. So those are 2 examples that maybe you don't know about. I think you might want to incorporate them into your presentation, because that did happen. Thank you.
I am unclear on one thing. Did you say the DSA did support the Kaiser engineers?
East Bay DSA does a whole bunch of strike support, and that was one example. Okay. We were on the picket line.
Okay. Let me start from the very end then. What I meant, nobody came to the support of the Oakland Kaiser engineers. I appreciate your comment. I should have made it clearer, rather. The DSA, I know that the DSA did strike fund support and whatnot. So did the SWP, for instance, another leftist revolutionary party.
Which party? I didn't hear.
SWP.
Got it. Thank you.
But what I meant more particularly was, and I think I thought it was coming clear through the context, but apparently I should have made it clear. So I appreciate the input. No other section of the working class, not organizations and whatnot, but like the working class itself, didn't come to the support. And
you're not including the Alameda Labor Council?
The Alameda Labor Council endorsed it, and there was a one-day symbolic strike for solidarity purposes.
Yeah.
But it would have been a different story if, say, the nurses themselves also went on strike. In fact, they broke a deal with Kaiser right before they went on strike together with the engineers. So they effectively left the engineers alone. And obviously, I'm not pointing fingers at any single worker or any group of rank and file workers themselves, because hey, if you're offered a better deal, you get a better deal and you go to your job. I understand that, but the union leadership, if there was a real militant union leadership, it would have been a different story. And this is precisely where we should intervene to prevent these type of divisions from happening, because at that point, the union leadership effectively of the nurses, not engineers, they effectively sacrificed the long-term interest of the entire hospital workers for the shorter-term interests of their specific constituency. And if there was a real united working class leadership that called on strike all hospitals, all hospital workers, that would have been a different story. So a united front can provide that organizational framework. It's not an easy task, but it's a necessary task. That's otherwise we will have more of this, within the same workplace. One section of workers will go on strike, the other will keep following up until a certain point and then drop the cause at the very last minute. And that's a mistake on, or conscious or unconscious, I don't know, but it's a mistake on the SEIU leadership, their part. Does that make sense? Or
yes, thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
You're reminding me of details.
Yeah. So the DSA and the dead mass of the DSA leadership. I know there are a lot of convulsions within the organization. And I know that there's a lot of militant constituencies within the DSA. But right now, as far as I can see, and please correct me if I'm wrong, first of all, there was the affair with, what's his name?
Well, Bowman.
What was that?
Bowman?
Am I thinking of Bowman? I'm forgetting his name, really. The guy who talked to this Israeli PR organization.
Bowman.
Bowman. Okay, thank you. There was that whole affair with Bowman, where the DSA leadership essentially suppressed internal dissent, internal discussion, because for people who don't know, and again, Susan, if I'm mistaken in details, please feel free to correct me. This politician who was a DSA endorsed candidate in the elections and got into office, started working with a very openly Zionist PR organization, and this is going directly against the DSA's own statutes, and the membership, especially the Palestinian membership of the DSA, called for disciplining Bowman, and the organization refused. And Bowman actually went onto a trip to Israel for a PR campaign, and the organization still kept refusing to discipline him. And in Jacobin, there was a piece about this guy excusing his behavior, essentially. And it all culminated just like a month ago or so in closing down the BDS caucus within the DSA. So the DSA leadership, as far as I can see, is really engaged in attaching themselves firmly to the Democratic Party. And of course, that involves, bowing down to Zionism. And the excuse to do that is that, we have to get the right people in the right places, and that's how we're going to solve our problem. And that's not how it's working. And of course, there's a mass basis to the DSA, and there are very genuine militants and whatnot. And in any good day, I would like to see the DSA in any good day in a Workers United Front working actively, but the leadership, or rather misleadership, is playing a very dangerous game. That is to say, attaching yourself to a bourgeois party, an imperialist party, for this or that, with this or that excuse, and suppressing your internal dissent to be able to do that. And that's very, very dangerous. But again, I would be happy to see the DSA in a common United Front action. In fact, they did participate, and they did great work in the Juneteenth committee that I was talking about earlier. And I'm happy that they were there. Other than that, though, like in the most recent United Front attempts and in the most recent working class campaigns, I haven't been seeing them. I haven't been, like, they haven't been as active as they were before the elections. So for the last 2 years or so, there has been a remarkable decline in militancy. And correct me if I'm wrong, and correct me if you, let me know if you disagree, but that's my political observation.
I'll say very briefly that DSA is more heterogeneous than you're describing, and so is the leadership, in my opinion. And it depends what you mean by the leadership. If it's the 16 people on the National Political Committee or people in the chapters all around the country, there's a lot of left tendencies represented, and there's very, ardent debate going on, including about the Bowman issue and the BDS working group. So, I think there's more nuance to the story than you describe.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate your input. I guess we'll see.
Where do you live, Ahmed?
In Oakland.
Okay, so do I. Maybe we should talk sometime.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for the question and the response. It is nearly like, we come to stop the video, but I have two hands that haven't had a chance to talk. So I'll allow the next two persons, Hisham and Mark, to ask questions, and then we're going to stop the recording. So Hisham, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you, Ahmed, for a very interesting presentation.
My pleasure.
Egypt currently is under a true fascist regime, and it cannot be worse than that. Recently, just like 2 days ago, they also forbade prayers in the mosques, which is my subject about this. As a Palestinian who always followed the Palestinian politics, and this is of course so much true for Egypt. The model that you presented in your presentation make me, in my mind, the question which always arose, I'm sure also in the context of Turkey, how can you make compromise or a unity or a working fashion with Islamist workers? There are workers who are Islamists. As then I'm not talking about the contradictions at the economic or the oppression level, but I'm talking about at the ideological level. Like Marxism, we all will be classified to Muslims as kafir and deserve to be killed because we don't believe in God. So this is always presented a problem to leftists and Marxists in Palestine, and I'm sure in Egypt. So this is a real problem, I feel, and we can see that now the Sisi of Egypt cannot ride on the emotional, religious emotion, but Erdogan of Turkey always still doing that, although he's either publicly or under the table, collaborating, for example, with Israel. But anything happens in Palestine, he jumps and starts saying, "Oh, the Aqsa Mosque," and stuff like that, just to keep in good touch with the Islamists. But a leadership of the unity entity that you're talking about, how could it deal with Islamic workers and to join them to the movement? That's my question.
Right. That is An age-old question. Like it's been because in the working class movement, for instance, in the early 20th century, Lenin actually discussed that. This is that not with Muslim workers, but Catholic workers who are like devoutly Catholic and have ties to the Vatican and whatnot, and are under the influence of reactionary ideologies. And I don't think there can be like one single unified response to solve all of our problems, because every country is different, every religion, every branch of the religion is different, and it is differently interpreted in different historical contexts and whatnot. So I can't give you like one single answer and say this is how you do it. Let's go and do it. Go ahead and do it. But well, let me put it this way. Since you gave the example of Turkey, in Turkey there is Hak İş, which is a very like declaredly Islamist working class union federation. And of course they have, very close tie to the government. They are like class collaborationists, yada, yada, yada, of course. And their constituency is very, very conservative. But I think it was a year ago or so, the Turkish government tried to, like, it was in the parliament, it was in the voting session. They tried to pass a bill that was gonna make the working hours even more flexible and reduce the wages and all these stuff. And Hak İş, with the other two major union federations, threatened a general strike and organized together with the other two, one of which has, with the other two federations, DİSK and Turkish, organized a major march to Ankara, to the capital. And the government had to roll back the bill that they were proposing. So when when the economic problems and other other like burning questions come to the fore, even the most conservative worker feels the need to fend off for themselves, regardless of maybe not regardless, but despite their reactionary ideology. And those are the moments that we want to seize. For instance, would we, if we had enough forces, if we had enough, enough power, whatnot, would we, in the U.S., in Turkey, in Palestine, whatever, would we go into, union federations like Hak İş, with reactionary ideologies? Would we go into those union federations and work? Hell yes. Hell yes. And declare we can tone down our atheism, maybe not necessarily secularism, but because we do want to be secular, but we can tone down our atheism. We can use a diplomatic language and whatnot, but we wouldn't be going there and discussing Marxist theory first and foremost. We would be discussing their economic problems, their political problems, and try to show them that their misleadership, again, this is another example of United Front tactic. Their misleadership has limits, are treacherous, they're class collaborationists. And even though they may have like reactionary ideas, whatnot, we, the communists, are the only ones who can provide a real leadership in their very like life and death struggle. As far as Palestine goes, I am critical of like a lot of organizations there, including the PFLP, but I think they have been doing a decent job at striking this balance, as far as I know. And please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not claiming like that I'm especially knowledgeable about Palestinian politics, but how can a revolutionary organization like PFLP and Hamas, for instance, can strike up temporary alliances in front of the common enemy? I think there's something to be learned there. with its mistakes, with its, whatever, but that's a good example that we can look into as a field of inquiry, as not like necessarily a paradigm of success or anything.
Before we go to Mark, I just want to interject something, is that that successful strike that Ahmed is mentioning was done because there is a confederation of labor unions calling itself the Revolutionary Confederation of Labor Unions, which is the second biggest confederation. So there is this policy, there is this socialist, there is this leftist huge confederation, number two in the land, that has a gravity. And that gravity does pull both Turkish and even Hakish. I mean, where would Hakish be, the religious confederation, when a huge number of workers and the unions and the confederations are fighting for obviously repressive measures that's coming down from a religious government, and they are obviously like left out, they're marginalized, they couldn't take that, so they are actually forced into fighting their own government. So that is true. The gravity.
That's exactly true. I mean, to further expand on what Mehmet said, my compatriot said, in 2015, when there was a major wildcat strike in steel factories. Nowadays it's called the metal storm. Like one factory after another was occupied without union authorization whatsoever. It was a completely wildcat strike back in 2015. A lot of Hakish, a lot of conservative Muslim workers quit their union federation, Hakish, and joined DİSK, Devrimci İşçi Sendikaları Konfederasyonu, the Revolutionary Workers Union Confederation. Massive influx. But again, it comes down to this: you have to be there. You, as the revolutionaries, should be there so that people can gravitate towards you. There's a beautiful propaganda poster, I believe belonging to the CPUSA from the 30s. There's this white worker in the middle. On the left, there's the communist with his daily worker and whatnot, and it says, "Speak to him." And on the left, on the right, there is a clan member with his,
Hood,
with his, clan outfit and whatnot, and the sign reads, "Or else he will." So you have to be there.
Okay, so it next was Mark, but Mark had to leave. He had to go to something else. So at this point, I think everybody who, we are coming to the next round of people, and the time is getting late. So I'm going to stop the recording, and then we'll continue in our free form.
Institute for the Critical Study of Society at the Nebo Proctor Marxist Library receives no corporate funding, nor do we have any paid staff. We rely on the support of working class folks that share our commitment to the socialist legacy of Karl Marx. We continue to need funds to meet necessary expenses, since we can no longer pass the hat at our in-person forums. Please send contributions to our treasurer, either online via PayPal or by check. The PayPal ID is ICSS Sunday, SUNDAY, at yahoo.com, and the name is Richard Fallenbaum. And checks may be made out to Richard Fallenbaum and sent to him at 1225 Nielsen Street, Berkeley, California, 94706. Fallenbaum is spelled Fallenbaum. To donate directly to the Marxist Library, send a check to the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library at 6501 Telegraph Avenue, Oakland, California, 94609, or directly or donate online at www.paypal.me/npml. For information, write to npml at marxistlibr.org, and the website is marxistlibr.org.